Close.
All right, let's commence.
There we go.
Hello and welcome to the National Road Safety Partnership Program webinar, Your Life Changes in an Instant, the lasting impact of Australia's worst crash. Next slide, please. My name is Graeme Thompson and I'm Director of the NRSPP and its many activities. To find out more, please visit the NRSPP website and register for our newsletter, or even better, follow us on social media such as our LinkedIn page. Next slide. Today's session will go for approximately 60 minutes. We have plenty of time for discussion. We'll be having, there's a pause point as we go along, and then we'll take questions at the end. We're going to be recording today's session. It will be shared on the NRSPP website and will be sent out 24 hours from now. Next slide. Now, oh, this has just changed for a second. We've just lost our duty of care. Anyway, we'll go. Just a duty of care reminder to everyone. Some of the content you're going to be going through and seeing today may be traumatic for some people. So I just want you to take a consideration that reflect, think how wonderful today, how your life is, how good things are. But if it does trigger an event at all, that you should step back, take the time, reach out to these sort of numbers and go for assist. But most importantly, after, go out for a bit of a wander and ponder how great life is, and you're coming up to a festive season. So next slide. Over to our presenters. We have two presenters joining us today. Our first presenter is Graeme Thompson. G'day, Graeme.
Hey, Graeme. Hey, Bernadette.
So Graeme is going to give a bit of an intro. It'll be his story, touching on about his life and how things can change in an instant. And I'll leave him to do that sort of component and walk you through why he's here. And it's his story. The other one joining us is Bern. G'day, Bern.
Hi, Jerome. Hi, Graeme. Hi, everyone.
So the main reason I've asked Bern to come along and join us is she's CEO of Amber Community, which is an amazing organisation based here in Victoria. And it's really to highlight, as Graeme takes us through his journey, how things have changed a lot. But one of the key things is if you don't know about Amber Community and the resources and support they provide, well, you could still be stuck in that sort of world where Graeme went through. So an amazing resource to draw on. And we'll be drawing on Bernadette's insights as we go through, so explaining why this really matters as well. So over to you, Graeme. Let's kick it off and dive on in.
Thanks, Jerome. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. I guess initially the question people might say is, why am I here? There's a couple of reasons. One is selfish. This is my story, and you know, I don't want anyone to have to go through that. And the second part of that is to make people think and also be selfish about their own safety, because if they can't look after, you can't look after yourself, then who else can? Yep, businesses have lots of policies and procedures, but ultimately it's down to the individual to make sure that they go home every day. So my story is a catastrophic incident, and the effects of that on the individual. And I might point out that while it's about the individual, it's also about the people that are around them, because they live this through the survivor, if you like. And often that's harder because they have no control at all. So why do we call it Your Life Changes in an Instant? Well, if you can, imagine your life as it is today. Everyone has dreams and hopes, and they've got plans of doing things tomorrow, next week, 6 months' time. And if you can, imagine now that that's all gone. You're still here, but none of those plans and none of those dreams potentially will become a reality, because everything in your world has changed. So difficult, yes, but you know, my life tells me that that's what happens. It just changes.
Can I just add to that, Graeme?
Sure.
Of looking at the broader picture, just wanted to reiterate or support what you're saying. What we've found working exclusively in the road trauma space and dealing with road safety and prevention is that people are often surprised at the ripple effect about how many people one incident can impact other than the people that are just immediately involved. So, you know, like you said, it's family, it's friends, it's colleagues, it's workplaces. And we work with all of those people across the board because the impact spread so far. And for something of this magnitude, there would have been literally hundreds of people that would have been impacted by this crash.
Yeah, and you don't realise, and probably still to this day, you don't realise how many people are affected by it.
And of course, emergency services who have to turn up.
First responders,
Yeah.
and you know, back in at this time, that there were so many unknowns what those people were walking into, and then of course how it affected them after. So to explain the effects, I need to take everyone back in history. So my incident was 12,760 days ago. Doesn't sound much when you say it fast. 34 years, 11 months and 6 days to today. Now, mostly life moves on, but that day is like it was yesterday in my head. It lives free there. But time can heal and you move on. So at the time, I was 22 years and 11 months old, one month shy of my 23rd birthday. I was single, relatively fit, getting paid to see the country and earning okay money. So what happened next? So on the day, I was in Sydney Central Station, planning to go to Brisbane. I was 2 days into a 4-day swing, had a co-driver with me that I'd travelled with many times. 3 days before Christmas was busy. Sydney was bustling, people going home for Christmas, going on holidays. It was just nuts, and you know, everyone sort of realises what Sydney traffic is like Friday afternoon heading out through the northern suburbs. We were an hour late by the time we got to the outskirts of Sydney. Having said that, we were still an hour late the whole trip, so we didn't make up time. And I just want to point out, if there's any business leaders on, imagine, if you will, getting a call that this has happened in your business. And he's talking about this yesterday, and I still, to this day, can't imagine getting that phone call. So this is the end result. This is after the effect. What we had was on an innocuous bend on the mid-north coast of New South Wales, 2 latest tourist coaches, 3:30 a.m, slight rain, and a head-on collision. Now, in those pictures, the vehicles have been pulled apart, but they telescoped 4 or 5 rows in on each other. It was a 200km/h impact. Just about everyone was asleep, and this is what you get. So what do you get? You get 35 fatalities instantly, including 3 drivers, 41 serious injuries. And they range from paraplegics to broken bones. Panic amongst the travelling public. We had, and every company had, we had cancellations. We had people ringing up, abusing staff members. Blame game. Who did what? And that wasn't just in the industry. That was people talking in the street. Who did what? Everyone's got a view when those images come on the telly. We had death threats to employees. Relationships break down, family disputes. And then as you move on, you have a coronial inquest. So there's 12 barristers, 5 insurance companies, government departments. We had the RTA in the day, insurance company for both businesses, Some of the individuals on board had their own legal representatives there. And only one person from the day could be cross-examined. And that was me. And now that's, anyone's ever been into a coronial court, and I don't wish that on anyone. That's not much fun. So stay out of it if at all possible. And immediately the state government of New South Wales dropped all heavy vehicles speed limits to 90 kilometres an hour for 6 months. And the end result, both companies, for numerous reasons, failed to survive the fallout. So we go to the individual, and I can only talk to me, but this is what happens. And a lot of this stuff you don't see. You just, you know, there was cuts and bruises, obviously, but a lot of this stuff, fractured noses, by the time you get back to your family and loved ones, all this stuff is invisible. I can read through them, but you know, 3 broken crack ribs on one side, 2 on the other side. Both of my feet, when I actually jumped out of the vehicle, were ruptured. Both my big toes were broken. I had a spine injury that took 10 years to find, and I live with that. And then in amongst that, there's this canal serrings in my spine, which can be caused by trauma, that potentially one day could paralyse me. Now that's still there. I still live with that. The other thing people think is this happens, you go in and get repaired, and it's all good. But I can tell you that last November, 34 years down the track, I'm still having parts fixed as a result. Things that you've had fixed previously wear out and new stuff arises. So it doesn't go away once the news cycle stops. Everyone else goes back to work, forgets, but as an individual, this continues on.
Can I also add to that, Graeme, that I guess as a community, we tend to focus, when we think about road trauma, we tend to focus a lot on lives lost, the number of lives lost, and we can look at the statistics and we can talk about how sad it is. And then for those of us who are lucky enough not to have lost a loved one, we go on and live our lives. I think what we forget a lot is the people who have been injured. And that can range from just breaking a limb and not being able to work for a period of time to what you've experienced over the last 34 years, nearly 35 years. So I think it's just important as a reminder to people that, like you said, once it was out of the news, the trauma didn't stop for you, and it's ongoing. And people often describe that, my life before and my life after, and different they are.
Yeah, and I laugh at that because you get angry in the initial stages. You get angry because people go about their life, whereas you're not. And in amongst all this stuff, you're actually trying to rebuild some of that life, but that doesn't. That takes a long time, and it still happens. But
you're also rebuilding and relearning whole new things because I guess you're quite different to the before, to what you are.
Yeah. You know, you have to reinvent yourself work-wise, and often that's hard enough when you want to, let alone when you have to. And I've had to do that a couple of times, but you know, you look at how you treat all those injuries and what that means, and time off work. And I'm still counting time off work. I wouldn't know how far they. It's got to be close to 9 years, I suppose. I just stopped counting. So if I can, next one. So in the middle of that, where you're trying to put your life back together, the media circus has gone nuts. So I can remember at the time I was taken to Kempsey Hospital. When I walked in, all the TV stations were on, all the different news channels. And this was all that was on. And then the papers come out and everyone's got an opinion on why and what. And in most cases, the news cycle, maybe after a week, once the blue and red lights stop flashing and it goes away. But I can tell you this went on for months. And then, and I'll get to that later, but after the coroner's inquest, it starts again because there's a reason for all this. And it just doesn't go away. You're reminded of it every day, which is terrible. But at the same time, you're drawn to it. There's no escaping it, and you want to find out as an individual. And I wanted to find out what it was. It's strange because you're in two minds of what's right and what's wrong. I don't think anything's wrong, but is it healthy? Not sure at the time. Probably not sure now, but it is what it is, and it's what you do.
And I think too, Graeme, that's certainly been exacerbated over the years now with social media. Things get out into social media instantly, and we have a lot of families who sadly, found out about the death of their loved one on social media before they were told, before the police had even had an opportunity to come to the front door. And I know emergency services work pretty hard to not let that happen, but it does happen. And then the commentary on social media, the blame game starts. And often when there's, for example, a heavy vehicle and a car involved, for example, it seems to be often that the drivers are blamed first before the investigation has even started, when it may not have been. And so that stuff has become even more hard to control and more hard for people like yourselves who've been impacted to avoid.
Yeah. Well, you get the 40-foot banner if it's a heavy vehicle, and immediately that's what you see. And I guess it's human nature to go, oh, that's where the fault was. And I think there's a message in here for business owners and people that respond to accidents and incidents to get on the front foot and try and control that, particularly if you have when your people are involved. And if there's a fatality, that's one thing. You need to get on the front foot and try and make sure the family members know. But if you have survivors, and remembering when this happened, there was no mobile phones and no social media. At the hospital, I was refused a phone call to let my family know I was okay. Initially, there was an argument, and one of the nurses just ended up taking me away. But until that time, and I'd been out at the site for 3.5 hours before I was transported to hospital. No one knew where I was. So I would encourage that if you have surviving workforce in an incident like that person, if they are able, should talk to their family. Because no matter how much you or I as a business owner tell them that they're okay, they won't believe it until they hear and see them.
Yeah.
It's very difficult for them.
And I have heard workplaces basically, for example, putting out an embargo on mobile phone use for a period of time until they've gathered all the facts as much as they can before they let people just out to put it out there. But like you say, getting the key people to be able to tell loved ones that either they're okay or where they are is definitely very important.
Yeah. So it's very hard to control because everyone wants a piece of you to find out immediately what happened and what the outcomes are.
And how old were you again, Graeme?
Months short of my 23rd birthday. So young. And to be fair, I don't know that, and I'm happy to be proven wrong, I don't know that someone that age would be put in that position anymore. I'm not sure either when they would get insurance for that. Maybe. But yeah, there's stricter rules around age, and even for trucks that don't have passengers. But when you've got 41 people on board, that increases the risk. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we get to the coroner's inquest, which in Sydney, it ran for, I think, 2.5 weeks. And you get in there, I got some bad legal advice at the time. I was told that I would be called, and I was told I wouldn't need any representation. But when I got there, it certainly turned out that I did. You know, that was hard because you relive all this stuff's going, and more than, you know, what you're saying today. There's they go through everything and you see everything, and there's lots more photos that, you know, probably shouldn't be shared in the public domain and probably never will be. But everyone in the court sees them again, and you relive it. So it starts that process again of what if. Now, that's the cover of the extract that I have. It's not the full report, but it certainly exonerates myself and my co-driver. And in the end, it was a case of one of the drivers being fatigued and fell asleep, unfortunately, and this is what had happened. So, you know, again, thing that no one else was doing at that time, that driver, no, he wasn't, but the effects of that on each individual was different, and he was tired, and, you know, unfortunately, this is where we end up. If he'd have missed us, we hadn't been there, he'd have probably drove into a cow paddock, which is still the same as it is today, and maybe had a few injuries. I don't know what that, but it certainly wouldn't have ended up where it is now. It's today. So PTSD, we hear a lot about it, and 35 years ago, almost, it was, I guess, relatively misunderstood, and it means something different for everyone. You know, there's lots and lots of symptoms, and I'll point out a few, but when you're in this, for me, when you're in this cycle, you think, I immediately thought there was something wrong with me, and I had a guy by the name of Donald Woodland, who was a Salvation Army officer, tell me one day after we'd met a couple of times that, you know, I was having a very normal reaction to an abnormal event. Now, at the time, I didn't believe him because you don't, or I didn't. But if you look at that last one, the survivor's guilt, it probably took me 20 years to get to a point where I didn't have that. Now, even today, I think, you know, why would I? I wasn't driving. I was asleep. I had no control yet. As the only surviving driver, and there was 4 drivers on board, there is, in my mind, there was guilt there because I was responsible for those people. But as I've got older and time's gone through, I take Don's words, and you know, we've met a couple of years since I've spoken to him, but you know, I understand he's completely right. I was having a normal reaction to a very abnormal event. But when you're going through this, it's difficult, and the help that was available. You know, I think we spoke the other day, Bern, that if this was today, the help and the willingness to get help from the individual, and I would be much easier. You know, I was clinically diagnosed, and as a psychiatrist wanted to admit me to a repat hospital in Concord in Sydney, and I refused that because I didn't, in my head, I thought I would never get out. Did I do the right thing? I don't know. I think I'm okay now, but you know, did I do the right thing? It took much longer, I'm sure.
I think that certainly it's no point looking back and say, did I do the right thing? You did the right thing at the time.
At the time.
You had.
Yeah.
And I think where things have improved over the last 34 years is really about, as a community, we generally have a better understanding about the impact that mental health has and the impact that trauma had, whether it be a single incident or or longer term trauma, and help seeking behaviour is improved. It's not perfect, and there are still people out there that feel that there is a stigma, but I think that's reduced, and having organisations, I guess, like ours and a lot of others, in terms of supporting people through trauma and bereavement, I think is a massive improvement on where we were back then. And I think when you said that you had a normal response to a very abnormal situation, people don't understand that. They don't really know what are normal responses to trauma. We get a lot of people calling in and say, I feel like I'm losing my mind.
Yeah.
And that's what it feels like.
Exactly.
And, educating people on common responses to trauma and kind of what to expect certainly helps, but you didn't have that back then, so you did the best with what you had.
Yeah, and I think you're right. You do, or I did, felt like I was losing my mind a lot. And for someone to say it's normal, you go, oh, it's not, because before I wouldn't have had this reaction prior to this, but you would. So yeah, it was very misunderstood. I'm glad to say that it's better treated now. A few happy snaps. The one on the left is what eventually was I had a diagnosis of some disc injuries in my spine, and that Meccano set was put in, and it's still there. It won't ever come out, but it was probably the one surgery out of the lot that eased the most pain. It was traumatic. It was horrible, painful, but it's great. I don't have any issues in regard to bone pain in my spine anymore. And the one on the right was the first knee replacement I had. That knee's had 8 or 9 different surgeries to get to that point. I had to wait till I was 50 to have that done. And subsequently, the other one's been done last year. I'm hoping that's it, but you never know. So 12 months after the incident, this memorial garden was dedicated. So the funds were raised by the Kempsey Lions Club, and it's still maintained by them. They had it built. It's, I was there 2 weeks ago. I actually can't go past without going. So every time I go down there, I go. Now I can go and not be cranky, not be uptight. I just go and remember, but there's a significance to where the piece where the names of those that perished, underneath there, they found one of the mirrors off one of the coaches in the paddock, and I believe it's the only piece that they didn't recover, and they left it there as a symbol and built that over it. Now that's probably 50, maybe 60 metres from the accident site, and that's how far it went. I'm not sure whether that was the furthest bit, but that's the significance of why that is where it is. So yeah, it's a great place. As I said, I continue to go to this day and will continue. And in the middle of that, and this is a road incident, but in the middle of that, this is also a workplace incident. So in the middle, you're mixed up with coroner's inquests, trying to get fixed, and then you've got a work cover part in the end. And I'll say this, we're much better at it now. But again, if you go back 35 years, there's no organisations like yours, Bernadette. There was very little help out there for, you just had to muddle through. And I guess a lot of it in regard to the work cover piece was about trying to get people mended and physically mended, back to work, and that claim gone, and potentially saving money. But there's all of these things that go through your mind, is how do you work your way through that? Now that's difficult, or it was. I guess it still is. I haven't been injured in today's world, but I've been on the other side dealing with injured workers, and we're a lot better at it now than we were then. Coining as a point, I've spoken to my employer at the time twice, once on the day and once at the coroner's inquest. That wouldn't be allowed to happen in today's world. Where we're required as businesses to keep in contact with injured workers. Yeah, we want to get them back to work, but we also want to help them mend physically and emotionally. And we're bound by that nowadays. And there's a lot more people to help us out. So it's not just an insurance company or an employer. And then, that's what it leads to. Takes so long to get diagnosed because either doctors won't see you, or back then they would, you'd had trouble getting specialists to see you often. So yeah, it's difficult for the individual, and as employers, we need to be on top of that. So I said earlier that everyone should be selfish and find ways to keep yourself safety, because no one else would, but you also need reasons. And I encourage everyone to find reasons to be safe. Everyone's happy to be tired, hot, dirty, potentially after a day at work. But you should go home in one piece, and have a reason to get in the car and go home. They're mine. I encourage everyone to get their own. But it might be 3 reasons. You might not have. It might be your dog, but there's always should be a reason to get in the car and go home. Let me just see what the next one is. I've lost my way a little bit. Okay, so I'll finish. There's couple of things. The next slide is a question I saw a couple of months ago, and I don't know who it is, and if I could give them credit, I would. I haven't got an answer to it. And I don't expect anyone else to have an answer to it. They'll give it to me, but if you can, answer it for yourself. So I still don't know. I've been looking at it for months. If anyone's got an answer, I'm happy to get it.
It's confronting, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's an incredibly confronting statement, but I guess sitting here from my point of view and the work that we do, and I guess with my background, for me, it's really looking at the whole big picture, including what have you got to lose if you are involved in a serious collision of any sort, incident on the road, and how will that make a difference to your family, and what to happen to you? So what would so for me, it encompasses a lot more than just the kind of advice or care we'd want to show our kids. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's such a confronting statement, but one that makes us stop and think about everything to do with our own mortality and our safety and how we contribute to that or don't.
Yeah.
And the other side, quite often you hear when people are involved in instances and they lose a loved one, they're quite often anchored about the last thing I said to them was X, Y, Z. Quite often it can be, I made a snide remark. I made things like this, and that's that burning moment that sits in with that person for the rest of their lives. I didn't get it, and I didn't get the chance to say I love them. I didn't get the chance to say how much they meant to me. And this is a powerful one because it shifts it to the other way. That it actually would give you the closure before you can actually say, and then my time's up. So you get a chance to say goodbye.
Yeah, but of course you don't know.
But you don't know.
Yes, that's a nice, well, I think it is confronting, but it's a statement that reminds us to be mindful and be in the moment and be where you are with your kids or your family or whatever it is. And
Yeah.
and you know, if I extrapolate that out, when you're driving, be driving, don't be thinking about everything else, you know, all the things that, you know,
Be in the
we've got to
moment.
say about fatigue
Yeah.
and behaviour and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So some key learnings. Again, this is a workplace incident and a road incident, but if I've got some key learnings for managers or people that run businesses, it's these three. Create an environment where your people are comfortable to speak up. If you don't feel safe or something's going on in your world that affects your work life, you should be able to go to your manager and speak up and change something. You know, if it's, you know, I'm tired because I've had a big week. I can't do it. If you're a driver, I can't do a full shift tomorrow, or for anyone, I can't do a full shift. But try and create that environment where people can speak up. For those that are, you know, managing fatigue, and everyone does, but manage fatigue in your business like someone's life depends on it, because it does. Too many people get fatigued, particularly drivers, and try and push through. Create an environment where they don't have to do that. And then when you do have someone that's injured, maintain contact and support. And as I said before, if they're injured and able to, get them to speak with their family as soon as possible. It's important.
I think from our perspective too, encouraging workplaces, and we do a lot of work with workplaces, encourage them to develop a safety as culture mindset.
Yeah.
Really looking at their business operations around how do we keep our employees safe, and basic things like, you know, in your system of management, do you have line managers who actually know their drivers, for example, and would notice if something is not okay? Because there's a lot of things that are going to stop people from putting their hand up and saying, I can't drive. And one of the primary reasons is obviously financial, and not want to impact their pay at all. So having people in that line of vision in terms of your managers about, well, how would you know if one of your drivers is not okay? Who's there is there any system in place? And that's not always possible, but creating an environment where people are comfortable to speak that, really exploring what that looks like. What's a culture of where people are okay to say, you know what, I'm not okay to drive, or do my job in the way that can keep myself safe and other people safe. So really kind of digging quite deep into that to define what it looks like from an organisational structure point of view.
Yeah, and I think that's different to what we've had. You know, we all have, and most places have lots of documented processes and procedures, and but ultimately, it's the people that make them work. And if you can't communicate them down to everyone and understand why we have them, then, you know, it'll break somewhere. And when it breaks, you got to have someone able to speak up and say it's not working.
Yeah.
For the workers, and I'll put drivers in brackets there. So know your limits and don't push beyond them. It's very easy, and particularly I hate to say it, for young men. You know, I can drive that far, and if I have a bit of a micro sleep or I get a bit tired, I can push on because I know I've done it before. You know, even if your limit is pick a number, and you start to get tired halfway through that, then, you know, that's a fair sign that you're not going to make it to your limit. So always, you know, get out if you get a bit tired. It's not worth it. Talk to your manager or supervisor if you need a break. As I mentioned before, if you've done 4 days and you're beat and you can't go out and get in and do your job for the next day, you need to be able to say that.
Yeah.
And be comfortable that it's not going to damage your ability to earn a living and stay in your job. And the other one to think of other road users. You know, the reality is for drivers, your job's dangerous enough without distractions and frustrations. And we're leading into that part of the year where everyone's going to be on the road because they want to go, you know, home or away for Christmas. So you're going to get professional drivers and holiday makers all being frustrated at the same time, which causes people to do crazy things, and then, you know, you end up in a situation like we had, and nobody wants that. Last but not least, a bit of a plug for me. This is my new business, and you know, part of that is telling this story to businesses with the hope of, you know, reminding people that they have a part to play in their own safety, and, you know, we don't want what has happened to me to happen to anyone else. So, thank you. Appreciate your time.
Graeme, thank you for that. And we'll delve into a bit more of a discussion now as well. It's a powerful story, and felt like I was just along the ride watching you and Bern bounce back and forth, which was fantastic. There's one story you mentioned to me, and when we're sort of prepping and talking about this, how you said there was a tourist in there talking about the roads and the conditions.
Yeah, we did. I'd driven out of Sydney to Taree. We'd had a break and changed drivers, and as I'd walked back to, and the back of the coach, there was a bunk where I slept, and the last seat before the bunk, there was a guy there, and as I walked up, he started talking to me, and I'd sort of sat in the bunk and we had a bit of a chat, and one of his comments was, how good are the roads in Australia? And I went, in my head, I went, well, you know, we're just heading into probably the worst piece of road in the country. And I said, really? And he said, yeah. And I can't, for the life of me, can't remember where it's from. But he said, the roads here are so good compared to where I come from. And I flippantly said to him, I said, well, wait 5 hours and let's have a conversation at the other end about what you think of the next piece. And of course, we never got to do that. And he didn't survive. But I think the story started, Jerome. There was an article in a magazine, and it was called The Sunday something in one of the papers after the coroner's inquest, that had a plan of both the vehicles and where people sat and whether they survived or not. Now, he was right in front of me, so, and there was no rhyme or reason to where people sat. But the conversation has stuck with me because I remember sort of being flippant about it. But then when I saw the plan, we had people saying that were booking travel and saying, I don't want to sit up the front. But the reality is, it didn't matter whether you're at we had survivors at the front, and the guy in the last seat didn't survive. So there was no rhyme or reason to that. But he viewed our roads as great. The reality was they weren't. So yeah, that was an interesting conversation, and unfortunately for that gentleman, it was the last one.
I think that's a really powerful. I'm just looking at some of the comments that have come in, and it's fascinating to have Alan. He just put a comment in the questions, and he's just making a note how just 1.3 seconds. That's all the difference was, and that's the bit. There's other comments just talking about the road trauma, what happened to me, what happened, and a lot of it, fate comes in, and it's just these small margins because you've got speed, you've got so many things going on, but all of a sudden, I guess we call it the Swiss cheese, when everything lines up and it makes it through, and all of a sudden you have a catastrophic fail like this one was, and 1.3 seconds either side, which Alan, he sort of looked after the sort of area he mentions for the RTA, and dealt with the train collision as well, so he's very averse to understands these things, but it just shows you how small these things can be. Yeah,
and every time I go and stand on the side of the road and look at it was on a innocuous bend, as I said, and the road almost gets straighter every time I look at it. And you just wonder how you go through a bend like that. But, you know, it's, as you say, a second here or a second there. None of us would be having this conversation. And again, we were an hour late, and I think they were probably an hour late coming out of it. I don't know whether that's right. I can't remember, but just because of traffic, you get held up. And the investigation told us, no one made up any time. We ran very close timetables, the two companies. Just one of those freak timing incidents. So.
And how do you feel like when you're being investigated as well? How were you treated along the way, just out of interest?
Look, it was, I guess, on the day after I'd been in hospital, I was taken to the police station and gave a statement, and then there was a follow-up one at home, which was fine. That was more information collecting, but during the inquest, it was I'm going to say adversarial, to the point where prior to us going to Sydney, both myself and John McKay, driver, had our logbooks checked by Queensland Transport at the Transit Centre in Brisbane. They were all fine. They'd gone back 2 months, checked. There was no issue. When I say that, there was a 15-minute extension of one leg in John's logbook, which was in the rules back then. If you were in half an hour of your destination, you could keep going. Didn't think much of it at the time, but when it came to the inquest, the RTA picked that piece as part of their investigation, that somehow John was someone to flaunt his fatigue hours. And that has somehow 2 months down the track had something to do with this information. But and I got, to be fair, I got pretty angry about that because he just wasn't someone to do that. He drove within the laws, and he'd had 6 hours sleep in Sydney prior to us leaving, and then he'd slept for 4.5 hours in the bunk before he took the wheel. So he was as rested as anyone on the road that night. So yeah, it was adversarial, I would say that, and that's not pleasant when it's your first time in that situation with no legal help. So yeah.
And there's a comment here from Rachel in the comments. Being someone that's experienced burnout as a bus driver, it comes down to being penalised for saying no when asked to do extra shifts. You're afraid you won't get further work if you say no. Rotation of shifts can be a relief driver, and being a relief driver has a huge impact on your fatigue.
Yep, I'd agree with the second part. The first bit, I can take Rachel's point, but and that possibly still happens. If it does, then that's really disappointing given the responsibility. But relief drivers, yeah, because you can get called at short notice. You're not properly rested. You're not properly planned. So yeah, that's a business process that needs to improve. And if you're going to have relief drivers, then you need to, as the fatigue laws tell you, you need to make sure that driver's ready and able to undertake that shift. Obviously, by that comment, that's not always happening. So there's an improvement. And
David, I'll call out David's comment as well. Graeme, thanks for your honesty, openness to share a life-changing moment. Your strength is inspirational. Your takeaways are a valuable message for us all to share with our family and friends. So I must say that it's a big step.
Yeah,
obviously this has taken place quite a while ago.
Yeah.
Has it only been of late you've sort of been comfortable talking about this?
Yeah, and look, I guess it goes back to the a little bit about the survivor's guilt. So that took so long to get over. And initially I didn't share a lot, probably some things I still haven't, some of the things I've seen, but I guess it's a bit like being in the coroner's court. There's stuff in there that no one should see. But I think, yeah, it's only recently that the reason for that is, I guess I attacked the trying to improve fatigue and management of drivers through my work, and I used that as motivation. But I think, you know, it's time to probably put back and do it directly and tell the story. And you know, I'm actually able to do that now. That I'm not guilty about it. Yep, I still have the effects, but I'm not guilty about it, and I can talk about it. So it's time to make sure it happens to no one else.
And Bern, on that as well, I know, like I've spoken with other people who've gone through it, and the advice some of the recent ones get is what you do is talk about it, express yourself, work through, so others sort of go through. What's your thoughts around this sort of approach?
Look, I think it's different for everybody, but in terms of what we do here, we have about 130 volunteers active at the moment, and the majority of those we work with to craft their story about what's happened in their life in a way that makes it deliverable to different community groups and education programs. So we take one of our volunteers everywhere. So these people, where I'm going with this is these people have been trained by us, and there's a certain amount of time that we like to pass before we'll actually onboard them as volunteers to try and get them at a point where they're ready to talk, and they obviously approach us. So I think it's different for everybody, and certainly not everybody needs counselling after a road incident, but something of this magnitude, what Graeme and the others have been through, our response as a community to traumatic incidents now, particularly ones that impact a lot of people, has certainly improved. With teams being deployed pretty quickly to support people who have been impacted. But obviously talking about it and understanding, going back to what we were talking before, understanding what natural responses are and what to expect and things like that can really help people's recovery. And I guess what we're trying to do in those earlier days following a serious incident is work on that stuff, so we're reducing the risks of people developing PTSD and things like that down the track, or if that does happen, that it's being picked up and managed, not just left where, like you said, Graeme, you didn't want to go into the repat hospital.
No,
that was you.
Yep.
Where I think it's changed. So I think it sort of varies for everybody in terms of what they need, but it's about understanding where you can get help, what does it look like, and having, particularly in when it's been a work-related incident, having the support of your employer behind you to help you through that process and navigate your way through what you are eligible to receive.
Just on that, but I one of the police officers that attended, I kept in contact with him for a while and actually spoke to him again about 6 months ago. At the time, he was advised that after that he was entitled to 3 counselling sessions, and that was it. And they cut him loose.
Yeah.
When I say they cut him loose, they cut him loose with support.
Right.
At that time, he was expected to go back and continue to do his job as per normal.
Yeah, and thankfully things have improved too with services in terms of their support structure. But I think that there are still across the board room for improvement across workplaces about how they manage this stuff, including, and I think we often take the emergency services for granted in terms of their ability to manage, and sadly I know a few ex-police members and things who have experienced some really traumatic things, and it does impact long term. So we do need to do the best we can.
Yeah.
Just a quick question here I'll throw in, and then what I'll do is I'll open up just for a last closing comment from you, Bern, and then you get the closing one after that, Graeme. So just a comment or question here from Rachel: is mandatory initial trauma counselling / debriefing an option after a serious incident?
My short answer is it should be. It's always an issue when we make anything mandatory. in terms of forcing people to attend counselling. So I'm always hesitant to say something is mandatory because people may not want to do what is being imposed on them. And I think that's a consultation process for employers. But I definitely feel that, and we definitely feel when we're working with organisations in the transport logistics sort of sector, particularly, or people who have fleets, is going back to that safety as culture, creating a structure and clear processes where if there is a serious incident, that people know what to expect from their workplace, where it's written in a policy and a set of procedures. If this happens, this is what we're going to do. And I think instead of using mandatory, Rachel, I'd probably just say we would strongly encourage people to have that structure in place and give people some options of where they can go rather than it just being a directive. But definitely having the support available is the key, and making it unencumbered by any feelings of guilt or there's something wrong with you if you do need to seek help.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're right, Bern, that having it and the business having it available, but for the person involved, there's a question there whether you couldn't, and I still think you couldn't force someone to go.
Yeah, and let's face it, when people are onboarded in organisations, they get access to policies and procedures.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to familiarise yourself with it, and people just skim through it and really don't take a lot of notice unless they need it. So it's being, and if for an employer, it's being responsive to that. So just, you've been involved in this incident. Here's the process. Here's the policy behind it. This is what you're entitled to, and having that information freely available, as well as, importantly, contacts to, for example, organisations like ours or psychologists and other mental health services, that they've got contact details and numbers for, so that they can give their staff that and say, these are your options here.
Yeah, exactly right. I agree.
Thanks, though, guys. Bern, in sort of 30 seconds, would you like to have a closeout comment?
Look, Graeme, it's been a pleasure working with you and finding out more about your story, and I think your presentation is absolutely compelling. And what we want to encourage employers and employees is really developing, as I said before, and I know I harp on it a lot, but that safety is culture mindset around keeping your workers safe, and for workers to understand their employer and their employer's perspective on employee safety. Where do they stand? So we tend to take on jobs without having a really good understanding of the backbone of the organisation and how they treat employees. So, really investigating that. And I guess as far as road users go, our message is always around, what are you doing on the roads to keep yourself safe and other road users safe? And being mindful that, like you said, Graeme, you highlighted in your presentation, a split second can change everything, and not making the assumption that it can't happen to me, but doing everything that you can to promote your own and everybody else's well-being.
Thanks, Bern. And Graeme, what would you like to close this out with, mate, as our final?
Look, firstly, thank you to you and Graeme for hosting, and Bernadette for coming along. And I would say this, that I'm fairly certain, although I didn't look, that your two organisations didn't exist back in the day. And for those that are unfortunate to have an incident, I'm glad that they are here. To everyone that joined us today, thank you. And I would encourage you to, if it's your business, to slow your people down, particularly leading up to the Christmas period. And for individuals, I'll go with Bern's comment that it can happen to you. If you ever think it can't, I've just shown you that it can. And I guess, I was no different at 22. You're 6 foot tall and bulletproof most of the time. What I've learned is you're not. And one instant just turns everything on its head. So thank you again. And let's keep everyone safe. Let's not have this happen again.
Thank you, Graeme. Thank you, everyone, for attending. You can see why we've got Bern to come and join us. And Graeme, super powerful story. Thank you for taking the time to share it and close out. So hopefully everyone travels safe. Take a moment, realise the festive season is upon us. It'd be great to see you in 2025. So take care and enjoy the moment and be in the moment, especially when you're out on the roads. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.